Thanks, Fiona. Thanks very much for having me, and to everyone for tuning in today. As Fiona said, please do pop any and all questions in the question box. I'd really love to hear from you, and we'll be happy to answer any queries that you have. Could we have the next slide, please? So just a little bit about what I'll cover today. I'm going to briefly run through what altmetrics are and how they can be useful. We'll take a bit of a look at how the technology works, and then we'll talk about who's using this data already, and more importantly, how can you make use of the data. And then I'll wrap up with a bit of an overview on how you can get started, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end if any haven't come in through the session. Next slide, please. So first up, what are altmetrics? Next slide, please. So altmetrics are indicators of online engagement that complement traditional citation impact metrics. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the impact factor and article-to-article citations. A really important thing to remember about altmetrics is that they're not designed to replace those. They're really designed to complement them and to help you identify activity from beyond the scholarly sphere. Next slide, please. So altmetrics have really become a bit of a buzzword in recent years, as we said in the description. And that's partly because increasingly funders are looking for researchers to demonstrate impact beyond the academy. So they're putting all of this money into research projects, and they really want to see what are the results of that money that we've spent. What kind of impact is this research really having beyond academia, either in the real world, or how are they at least engaging people beyond academia? So in the UK, we have the REF, where institutions are measured on a number of things, including increasingly the impact of their work. And then in the US, for example, we have organizations like the NSF, who when researchers are applying for grant funding, are asking them to demonstrate how their research is being disseminated more broadly. Next slide, please. I'll just do the slides, I think it's easier. So what challenges are authors having today? Well, increasingly they're struggling to get their work seen and read. I know a lot of you publishers are doing really great things to help them get their work out there. But with so much being published today, this is becoming more and more difficult for authors to know that their work is being received and read and interrogated by the right people. They're also looking to identify potential collaborators. So these might be young or emerging researchers in their field, or even just people that they haven't come across before. At the same time, of course, many of them are trying to attract new funding or to make more informed decisions about where to publish. So which journal is going to get me the most impact, whether it is in citations or some other measure, who is reading those journals, and how can I know how it has been received? And then, as I just mentioned from the previous slide, with funders looking for evidence of that broader reach and influence, authors are looking for new indicators or easier ways to uncover this for themselves. So rather than trawling through the internet, trying to find examples of perhaps people talking about their work, or just relying on close colleagues to give them feedback, now with altmetrics, they have a way to evidence that much broader reach more easily. And then, of course, prioritizing what to read. So the flip side of so much being published is that there is so much more for them to read as well, of course. And that is also a thing that altmetrics can help with. If I just go to the next slide. So as I've mentioned, altmetrics are really designed to reflect broader engagement. So on the one side, you have academic attention, which is things like the journal impact factor, citation counts, the H-index. So very kind of numbers-based traditional bibliometrics. And then on the altmetric side, you have this idea of the broader attention. So it might be things like mentions in news reports, references in policy. And as I said at the beginning, these are really designed to complement each other. So altmetrics and citations can both be used alongside each other to build up that bigger picture of the broader impact of a publication. And when we think about who's engaging, there's a really wide range of people out there who are talking about research who aren't necessarily scholars themselves. So with what altmetric tracks, for example, we pick up things like discussions on post-publication peer review platforms, references from Wikipedia, shares of a paper on social media, so places like Facebook and Twitter, where researchers, but also engaged members of the general public, perhaps kind of patient advocacy groups, for example, are sharing original research with their followers or with other groups who they know will be interested in the work. Coverage in the mainstream media. So there's been a big push, I would say in the last 5 years really for journalists to link back to their original sources. So to show the general public the original research that underlies the science stories that they're writing. So picking up those links can really help us understand how the ideas in research are being translated to a broader audience. And then citations in non-journal sources, so for example from policy providers, which is a huge thing for institutions to be able to understand what impact their research is having on public policy, either in a specific country or from a specific policy maker, for example. Excuse me. And then we do also pick up engagement on scholarly platforms, so places like F1000. Excuse me. So I mentioned that traditional bibliometrics are very qualitative, so very numbers focused, and the same is true to an extent of altmetrics. So we count the number of times that something gets referenced in the news or on social media, but then there's also a quantitative we do have the quantitative aspect where we can answer things like how many or how much, but then there is also the qualitative aspect. And this is what is really important to understand about altmetrics. So you can see who is talking about the research, where they're talking about it, and what they're actually saying. So we aim to make all of our data really transparent so that you're not just saying, okay, this paper has had 10 tweets, what does that really mean? But you can actually see who has tweeted about it and what their opinion of the piece of research was. And this is really useful because if you think about citations, they often take quite a long time to accrue. So you might publish something, but then not see a citation for years afterwards. So you don't really know beyond your immediate circle how that piece of research has been received or what impact it's had beyond your immediate colleagues. With altmetrics, you can see from this timeline here, the kind of things that we're picking up are very immediate. So as soon as something is published, we are tracking attention sources and we'll pick up any references back to that research. So for example, within the first few hours, you might start to see tweets or posts on other social media. Within a day or two, you'll see a lot of news outlets covering the work. And then as time goes on and people have had more time to digest it, you might get more in-depth pieces like blog posts, Wikipedia pages being updated, the work being featured as a research highlight, and then eventually through to citations in policy documents. So showing again that kind of move towards real world impact. So it's really valuable to see all of these things that are happening before you ever get to a citation. If you're not looking at altmetrics, you're potentially missing all of this activity that can tell you how that article is being received. In terms, okay, researchers are facing lots of challenges, but I think many publishers would agree that they are too. Increasingly, there's a drive towards open access. So of course, you want to attract as many good authors as possible to make your content as valuable as possible. So really providing them with these insights adds value for those authors, but also for readers, because all of a sudden they get this additional context around how a piece of work has been discussed and what other people thought of it. So having altmetrics on your site can really help add that additional value for readers and for authors and subscribers to your content. And it's not just about having a shiny badge there for people to see. You know, for authors, this is really valuable feedback that otherwise it would take a lot of work potentially for your internal teams to collate and provide them with a report to. With altmetrics, it's just a click of a button. Tied quite closely to that, of course, is demonstrating the importance of your content. So if you are offering a subscription-based journal, then when you're talking to an institution, it can be really valuable to show how perhaps it's not just a niche field that your content is reaching, but actually it's having a much bigger impact on society's understanding of a topic, and therefore how important it is that their institution doesn't miss out on having access to that research. And also tied quite closely to that, of course, is this competition for shrinking budgets. So whether that's for an APC or for an institutional subscription. And then, of course, aligning your goals with those of the scholarly community. So I think most of us are probably familiar with the concept of publish or perish, and some of the measures put on researchers today. And what we're really trying to do with altmetrics is bringing something positive in to say, you know, to encourage researchers to share their work more broadly. There's a lot of interest out there from audiences beyond academia. And with things like altmetrics, it can help authors understand how the outreach activities that they're doing is working or are working, what to continue, where they might find new audiences to engage with. So all of that public funding that is being put into research can now, the engagement that that is driving can really be highlighted with the application of Altmetrics and the drive towards open access research. So how can Altmetrics help? They can help you understand your audience, so you can really see how your research is being received and interpreted. As I mentioned, they can help you report back to authors, but also to editorial boards or society partners that you might be working with. So you can include, not just the citations that the journal content has received for the year, but actually which articles receive the most engagement beyond the academy. You can measure the success of outreach and promotional activity. So if you're doing any marketing campaigns or perhaps any special issues where you want to see how that particular content has performed in terms of engagement, Altmetrics will enable you to gather those stats relatively easily. They can help you identify hot topic content and guide future strategy. So if you're thinking of creating a special issue in a certain area, for example, you could perhaps look across all of your previous content to see which articles received the most engagement and then pull those together into one special issue. So it's those kind of use cases that we're increasingly starting to see publishers apply this data to. And then, of course, just demonstrating that you are open to innovation and an acknowledgement that publishing is no longer just about subscription access and articles, but it really is about being more open and engaging other communities. And as I've mentioned, Altmetrics really are complementary to citations. So if you take anything away from this presentation, please take that. They reflect very different things. I would never say that Altmetrics are a measured indicator of citations that are to come, but that is not what they are designed for. The whole point is to help you tell this bigger story around the research that you're publishing. So it's really important to be responsible with these metrics. I've mentioned that Altmetrics aren't just all about numbers, that it's really about understanding who is talking about your research and what they're saying and why. So the numbers are really just an indicator. They do not tell you the full story. Of course, any metric will always only act as a complement to expert opinion. Nothing will ever replace reading the paper and making an informed decision about how accurate you think the results are, or how valid you think the arguments are. And to always look beyond the numbers, and this is something we encourage all of the researchers who use our data to do. So what does the data actually look like? This is what we call the Altmetric details page. This is the collated record of attention that we create for each item that we pick up engagement for. So you can see along the top here, this is the article title in this case. Down the left-hand side, we have what we call the Altmetric donut, an attention score, and a summary of all of the mentions. And then in the tabs that you can see through the middle of the page, you can actually click through to see the text of all of the original mentions, and even click through to those news sources, for example, that have mentioned the article. And we think that's really important in terms of transparency and helping people understand where the research has been talked about. Just to talk a little bit more about the donut and the score, I'll just go to the next slide. Actually, I think I have it here. So the colors of donut reflect the sources that we have found attention for the item from. So for example, the red will always indicate that we found attention in a news source. Yellow is always blogs, light blue is always Twitter. So you'll see if you look at a lot of donuts together that there are different color combinations. So if you see something that's very heavily light blue, it's had a lot of Twitter attention. And it's a really nice quick visual indicator of where has the engagement for that item come from. And then we have the attention score. So this should never ever be used on its own as an indicator of impact. It is an indicator of the amount of attention that an item has received. So each attention source contributes a different weighting to the score. So for example, every time we find a mainstream news article, so for example, something like if your research gets mentioned in the BBC News and we pick that up, that will contribute 8 to the score. So the score does go up as the item gets more attention, and we do weight sources really depending on the kind of likely reach of that attention. So obviously if your research is mentioned in a BBC article, it's likely that an awful lot of people will see that. Whereas if it is mentioned perhaps on a Reddit or a Pinterest thread, it's likely that fewer people would see that. So that's what this is designed to reflect. And when you're looking at a lot of articles together, having that score is really helpful for just helping to identify where is there a story that is worth investigating further. So the higher the score, the more attention, and therefore maybe it's worth clicking in to see why were people talking about this so much. It might be attention for a bad reason. They might have made a mistake, or something might be a bit controversial, or it might be attention for a really good reason. You know, it might get a lot of coverage because they've made a huge scientific breakthrough or something like that. One of the really valuable aspects of Altmetrics is that they're not just for articles. They can also be applied to things like data sets, books, images, any item that has a unique identifier, whether that's a scholarly identifier or even just a canonical URL. So here you can see an example of the book tracking that we do as well. And this book has been mentioned in a blog and also saved by 5 Mendeley readers. And if you're wondering why there's no red in the donut, Mendeley readers don't actually count towards the score because the data that we get from Mendeley, we can't make it fully auditable. So we can't show you exactly who has saved the work to their Mendeley library. So that's why we keep it separate from the score and the donut. Here's just an example of a Routledge book that we have found some attention for. And in this case, it's attention from the Open Syllabus project. So that's a really interesting way of understanding, particularly for books, where they're having an influence on today's teaching. So, okay, the book hasn't got a very high score here, but look, it's being used in, I think it says 12 institutions around the world, which means, potentially it's having a really big impact on either future scholars or future practitioners. And then just an example of Altmetrics for data sets here. So in this example, we've got a data set on Figshare that has some attention. So how does it work? There are basically 2 different lists. One is a list of places where outputs live. So that tends to be publisher domains. So for example, the Ingenta Connect domains where your content lives, or something like nature.com. And then we have another list, which is a big list of attention sources. So that is places like Twitter, BBC News, thousands of blogs, policy sources. And we're routinely tracking or constantly watching those attention sources for links that go back to domains that are on the first list that I mentioned. And when we find a link, we follow it back, and then we look on that page to find the identifier for the item. So we'll see a mention in BBC News. We'll follow it back to your Ingenta Connect journal page, to the article page on Ingenta Connect. And then we'll say, okay, on this page, is there a DOI? Yep, that DOI means it's this article, and then we'll make that match, and the mention will appear on the details page. In terms of the sources that we track, so thousands of news outlets and blogs, post-publication peer review platforms like Publons and PubPeer, a growing list of policy documents, so we're adding to this all the time, and it spans across kind of health, climate science, and other kind of non-scientific disciplines as well. Reference managers, so you saw Mendeley on the previous slide, and then other sources as well. So for example, syllabi, Wikipedia, YouTube, F1000. If you have access to our Altmetric Explorer platform, which is our big database, you're actually able to see Scopus citations in the individual details pages as well. And if you have a Web of Science license, we can also show those in there. And then social media, which I think is almost what Altmetrics are most famous for. And it is a little bit unfortunate in a way because they really are, as you're hopefully starting to see, about much more than just social media. We do see a lot of activity from Twitter because I think it's, it's so easy to share things on there, and a lot of people have professional conversations on there. But Altmetrics are about all these other things as well. So our pipeline. So as I mentioned, maybe it's a little bit clearer here. So we monitor the sources for mentions. We follow the link. Crucially, we also disambiguate between different versions of the paper. So someone might link to, for example, the PubMed record, and someone else might link to your journal publisher page. We'll match those 2 together so that you only get one combined record of the attention for what is actually the same paper. So we make the match, we push it to our pipeline, we analyze the source and the author of the mention to determine the amount to add to the score, and then we push it all through to that details page so you can see it, and anyone clicking on the badge on your site can see it as well. And that happens pretty instantaneously for a lot of our sources. If someone tweets a paper, we typically pick it up and add it to the details page within a few minutes. So it's really quick, and there's an awful lot of data flowing through our system all of the time. And then, so all that happens every time we see a mention, and then of course we find another mention and the whole process begins again. So tracking your content. For the majority of your journals, I would assume it would be the DOI, but as I've mentioned, we can track other scholarly identifiers. This is based on the domain and ISSN data. So we like to know which journals the articles belong to as well, not just which publisher, and that's where the ISSN data comes into play. And once we are tracking the domain where your content is hosted and the actual journal, we can just pick up new content automatically, of course. So everything automatically updates. Once the badges are embedded, there's not really anything more that you would need to do. Metadata is really important. You might have guessed this already. And luckily, I think because you're on Ingenta Connect, yours will be perfectly set up for us, I'm sure. We require a few kind of basic meta tags to make sure that we can match the attention to the articles. With some publishers, we struggle with this a little bit, but I think because your content will be hosted on Ingenta Connect, you should be well set up and ready to go there. But it is really important if in future you ever find yourself thinking about updating your content within the Ingenta platform, just to make sure that those things remain. Occasionally we find that a publisher has changed their entire site and not mentioned it, which can we fix, of course, but it's nice to have a bit of advance warning. So who is using Altmetrics? Publishers, of course, make up a huge part of the users of Altmetrics. So many of the world's biggest publishers, such as Springer Nature, Elsevier, who else have we got on this slide? Taylor and Francis come to mind, Cambridge University Press, all have badges, and many of them are Explorer platform too, but also beyond just publishers. So some of the world's leading funders, like the Wellcome Trust, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, are integrating the badges into their open access content platform. And then universities, so Duke, Cambridge, and government organizations such as the World Bank and the CDC. And they all have slightly unique use cases as well. So funders, for example, are using Altmetrics to see who their funded research is reaching, to inform proposal evaluation. So if they get something from a researcher, they might want to look to see what what engagement has this researcher achieved in the past. Increasingly, I think funded projects have a public engagement requirement within them. So helping to understand what someone has done in the past can help them see how that might play out again. They are also keen to understand their broader impacts as an organization as a whole, so where their work is having an impact on policy, and it can help them identify emerging experts or key opinion leaders that they might want to engage with. Institutions, of course, are keen to support their researchers and help them get that funding that they need. At the same time, they want to showcase the expertise, so they might be focusing, for example, on building up awareness of their institution in a specific discipline. And Altmetrics can really help them tell that story. So tracking that influence and reach is made much easier with Altmetrics. And it can also help them inform collection management decisions. So if they want to see, where is a lot of conversation going on, which journals are attracting attention, and why might that be, then Altmetrics can help them do that. We also work with some pharmaceutical companies who are looking, for example, to develop their publication strategy. Some of them are very advanced in this field and make very informed decisions about where to publish, and have been relying on citations and things in the past, but now increasingly are integrating Altmetrics into that conversation as well. We actually provide Altmetrics for clinical trials as well, so that enables them to see those really early stage conversations before something even gets to be published. And of course, when they're using our database, they can see the attention not just for their own research, but also that published by their competitors, which helps them get a much better understanding of what's going on in the field and how the engagement that they're achieving compares to other companies that are doing the same kind of thing. And then, of course, other publishers. So for many of the same reasons that you would probably want to use Altmetrics, so providing value to their authors, monitoring the outcomes of their marketing activity, informing editorial decisions, so whether that's identifying authors that you might want to ask to publish with you, deciding future journal scope or special issues, or even if you're looking for reviewers or editorial board members, you can use Altmetrics to see which researchers are already talking about the publications in your journal, and then evaluated them based on their profiles to see whether they might make a good reviewer or a future editorial board member. And really just to understand their audiences. We've had a lot of publishers who are surprised to see exactly who is actually talking about the content in their journals, even if they don't have access via an institutional subscription or otherwise. And then, of course, your authors. So we hear from thousands of them every day, whether via Twitter or writing into us to ask, maybe something about the score or some of the data we've collected. And we see a lot of really positive feedback. So they get excited when they see the engagement that their work is having. We've had many authors who, when Altmetrics have been added to their papers, they've come back saying, oh gosh, I'm really surprised. I had no idea that this media mention was there, or that this person would be talking about my work in this way. And it's really lovely feedback to get. And we quite often see that when a publisher adds the journals, adds the badges to their journal, the researchers really notice. It's quite often that we'll suddenly see a couple of tweets on Twitter with researchers saying, oh, look, so-and-so has added Altmetrics to their papers. That's really interesting to see, kind of thing. So it's really good to get that positive feedback. So how can you use Altmetrics? So I've talked a lot about the badges, just to show you a bit about what they look like. Here you can see an example on the TNF page where they've chosen to integrate them alongside the view counts, so the download counts, and citation counts. Quite often, if you look at a publisher page, they might have done it like this, and there'll be a lot of Altmetric attention there, but maybe not any citations yet. And that will be because, as I mentioned, the Altmetric data is so much more immediate, and citations take that little bit longer to accrue. So it's really about giving your authors that early feedback. And then whenever you see the badge, you can click through to the details page. And these are custom branded as well. So we would take your publisher logo and add it to the top of the details page, so that your authors would very much feel like they haven't left your journal site entirely. They're just seeing a little bit of additional information about the article via our page. And then the Explorer, which is our database that I mentioned. So here you can browse and report and export the data for any item that we've picked up attention for. And this is really useful for seeing kind of at the journal level, and also how you compare it to other publishers in the same fields. So in terms of author services, I know many publishers have departments that are specifically focused in this space. Altmetrics really are about providing that instant feedback, demonstrating your commitment to supporting their needs, to growing engagement. You can really encourage your authors to get out there and talk about their work, or share it, share links to it via either maybe their email signatures or their own social networks, when you can show them so easily the impact that has. And then just improving the visibility of your content in general. So you may find that some of your content has quite low Altmetric scores to begin with. That is in no way a bad thing. Sometimes, like I showed with the book example, a low score can still mean a huge amount of engagement. But what it can also help you do is identify areas where maybe there are other bloggers, for example, that you might want to look to build relationships with to get your content in the hands of a broader audience. The stats that you can see here are from a survey that Wiley ran a couple of years ago now, actually, when they first integrated our badges. And they asked people on their websites what they thought and whether it would make them more likely to submit. So 80% of the people that responded to the survey agreed that the article metrics enhanced the value of the journal article. And nearly 50% said that they were more likely to submit to a journal that provides article level metrics. So it's really interesting to see this feedback and see the impact that offering those additional services has really had to their publishing program. For editorial teams, obviously they can use them to monitor engagement. You can also, of course, even if you don't have Altmetrics yourself, start to explore them in other journals. Thousands of them already have the badge on. So you can start to click around and see what kind of attention they're getting, what kind of audiences or channels they're receiving attention from. You can gather those insights, as I mentioned, to inform content development, like special issues or the scope. And then, of course, identifying the potential reviewers, authors, or editorial board members. For marketing and comms, it is actually now that we're starting to see some really interesting use cases in this area. So not only can you use Altmetrics to track the effectiveness of your campaigns, but you can also find popular content to feature and then build really nice special pieces on your websites where you kind of feature those articles. You might have a bit of conversation with the author about how they managed to achieve such reach, or what the eventual impact of their work was. Because of course, although Altmetrics can provide an indicator, they won't tell you the whole story. But it's a really nice way of, beyond just scholarly citations and downloads, and therefore assuming that, oh, this must be a popular article. Now you can actually see, some conversation between real people, and that's a really nice thing that you can highlight in your campaigns or on your websites. So again, identifying new audiences, so perhaps bloggers who perhaps are talking about other research in the same field, but not yet really mentioning your journal much. It might be worth reaching out there to build relationships. And of course, reputation management. So as I mentioned before, it's not always necessarily positive attention. And if something isn't being received perhaps quite how it was intended, Altmetrics are really valuable for flagging that up very quickly, but also helping you identify who do you need to reach out to, or what is the best way of managing that situation if you feel you need to get involved. And then sales, of course, I mentioned demonstrating the relevance of your content, so demonstrating the value and how much reach it is having and what influence it is having. You can highlight achievements, so it's really nice to be able to go to an institution, of course, and say, oh, look, 3 of your faculty published in our journal, look at all this great policy or news coverage or whatever, for example, that they had. And I think you'll often find that that's something that the library might not know about otherwise. The researchers themselves might know, the research office might even know, but the library, perhaps the news would not have reached them. I think we're all fairly familiar with how disjointed things can be across big organizations. And then, of course, aligning objectives. So going back to the idea of supporting a more open communication and a broader communication of scholarly work. So getting started, I can see there are lots of questions. We'll do them at the end, I think. Getting started. So we get some questions sometimes about kind of access and reliability, and will this affect my website and stuff? The answer is no, it won't. We handle a huge amount of data. Adding the badges to your web pages will not slow them down at all. As I've mentioned, the data updates in real time as new mentions are found, and they're really reliable. We have 99.9% uptime, so your users can rely on going to your pages and being able to see the badges there. And yeah, we're used to handling this huge amount of data now. We have a team dedicated to really looking after our systems in the back end. I think it's really good to have that support in place, because when you're looking at a service like this, there are inevitably questions, yes, around reliability, but please be reassured that it is very reliable. So implementation is really easy to get started. We might actually already be tracking your content. We may well have the domains on our whitelist and just be picking up mentions as we've gone along already. We do have a dedicated implementation manager in the Altmetric team who would work with you and your Ingenta contact to get you set up. Adding the badges to your journal website actually just requires a couple of lines of code, which the Ingenta team, I'm sure, would be taking care of for you. So it is not a big job. We'd work with you to customize the details pages to get them to how you want it to look, so with your banner along the top. And then we'll also provide training and rollout materials. So we have a lot of support materials available on our website. We have a really extensive knowledge base that covers a lot of the kind of common questions that come up, like how is the score calculated, what sources do you track, that kind of thing. We have a lot of materials on our YouTube channel with some really handy videos, both for you and the researchers that publish in your journals there. So what are Altmetrics? How can editors use them? How can you use them for getting tenure, for example? And then we have Lily, this lovely lady in the picture here. Lily is our engagement manager. She's based in the States, actually, and she works with our customers individually to help get them trained up, to give them support that they might need, or to talk through ideas with them, and also runs regular training webinars that anyone is welcome to join. And then I think almost lastly, we have our ambassador program. So this is run by my colleague Josh. We launched it a couple of years ago. And it is for publishers, institutions, funders, researchers, anyone around the world who is interested in learning more about Altmetrics, but also helping their colleagues or their teams understand more about them as well. So if you join the ambassador program, and we love to have people who are actively using our data in them, of course. We have many publishers who've done a lot of great things. We provide access to additional training materials, presentations, kind of some sneak peeks and some insider talk about product developments and other things that are going on in the kind of Altmetrics world. And then we run quarterly webinars as well, where we give you updates on the latest developments and anything that we've heard across the Altmetrics industry. So the ambassador program is just a really nice way of, you know, giving someone that responsibility of kind of staying tuned in to what's going on in this field, because it is evolving so quickly. So in terms of next steps, I will of course answer questions here, but if you're wondering where to go from here, interested in Altmetrics, I would suggest taking a look at some other journals. You know, click on a few badges, take a look at the data, explore those details pages a little bit to see the kinds of attention that we're talking about. And then if you are interested in adding them to your journal pages, do get in touch with your Ingenta Connect account manager, because I'm sure they would be happy to help.